Okay, so welcome to the Fitness Philosopher Podcast. My name is Adam Fisher. I will be your host. I also go by my pen name THEGN. We'll talk about that in a minute. But okay, so this is our first podcast. So I really thought I would just kind of talk to you guys about who I am and what I'm about, because I am not what many people would expect from a guy who works in the fitness industry. So, in this podcast, what we're going to cover is sort of fitness, philosophy, criticism, just sort of whatever is bouncing around in my skull at any given time. And that could be a lot of different things. It could be so many different things because I have a really weird set of interests. So, kind of to start off with my story, to give you guys sort of the full background of everything that's happened to me so that you know where I'm coming from. I started out as one of those 140-pound weaklings from the old, Atlas ads where they were like, oh yeah, just lift some weights and then you can kick this bully in the face. So I was legitimately 140 pounds when I started lifting weights, actually. So that is literally true. But as a child, I was not very social. I didn't have a lot of friends. I read a lot of books, I played a lot of video games, and that was really about it with my life. I wasn't actually very happy, and I didn't realize that until much later on. In high school, I was really trying to come out of my shell, and I was doing a pretty bad job of it. I became very infatuated with a certain woman, and what happened was she did not reciprocate those feelings at all. So I kind of went into this downward, spiral of depression and anxiety, and I wasn't able to sleep at night, so that made everything worse. And what happened was my therapist recommended that I should take up exercise. And at the time, I had been doing distance running a little bit. When I was about 12, 13, 14, maybe 15, I had been mostly doing distance running stuff to work out, doing DDR like any nerd. But yeah, I'd never really tried lifting weights, or I'd never really thought about exercise very seriously. I didn't really like it. And that's, again, because the only exposure I had was to distance running, and I didn't like distance running. My body isn't really built to enjoy distance running. Although I'm kind of starting to enjoy it again, but that's beside the point. Point is, I decided to try the, lifting weights for the first time. So I started going into the gym, and I started lifting weights, and I loved it. I mean, I face-palmed my way through 6 years of not having any clue what the hell I was doing. But I had fun. I started to see results, and I started to really get serious about it later on after college. So at first, it was mostly just machines. I didn't really use free weights. I was afraid. The gym that I was at had like one room that was cardio machines, and then they had another room that was all the free weights, and I kind of shied away from the free weight room because I was a little scared of it. As we all are, when we get started, that's totally natural. But what happened was I started out with machines, and then I slowly added in body weight exercises. I added in free weights. I started developing plans. I started realizing that, I should do bodybuilding splits. I started training for bodybuilding. I started eating more. I ended up doing powerlifting now. I'm, completely into the strength stuff. But, that was over the course of about 10 years. So it's been about 10 years now since I really started working out. And in the beginning, again, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was enjoying myself. And that, I don't want to say that single-handedly helped me get out of my depression, but it was a huge factor in sort of breaking that cycle of depression that I was all about. So, after high school, I went to college. I got a degree in English and philosophy as a double major. That's my undergrad degree. And at the time, I wanted to be a fantasy author. I've always been about my fantasy work. Again, I've always been a huge nerd. So I wanted to do that for a living. Of course, that's not very practical. I didn't really think about that at the time, but once you're halfway into a major, you kind of just buckle down and go the rest of the way. So I got myself an English major, philosophy major, that, just sort of focus on my interests. I would say that I'm still very much into the fantasy stuff, into the writing. I do write as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I am not so much into the philosophy stuff anymore, unfortunately. It's just one of those things where as you get older, you sort of have to specialize a little bit more in order to get good at anything, and so I just don't quite have the time that I used to have to sit around and read philosophy texts, and sometimes they can be boring, you want to do other stuff for fun. So I do have that philosophy background, but again, it was just an undergrad degree, so I'm not, the best philosopher in the world, but I do like to take a very philosophical approach to some of my writing, the way I approach even my fantasy writing, and some of my fitness writing as well. So what happened was I graduated college with a virtually useless degree, and I decided, you know what I can do? I can get a personal training certification. So I got myself a personal training certification. I got myself a job doing, personal training for a small gym, as well as managing it later on. I got promoted to be a manager. And I did that for a couple years, and obviously I learned a lot about fitness in that time. That's about when I took up powerlifting. That's when I really started to focus on my diet. I got up to about 220 pounds at some point. I'm now much lighter. I'm now about 185. But the bulk mode was full engage at that point. I was big, and I enjoyed it, but I also enjoyed not having to eat as much as I used to have to. So it's a trade-off. But yeah, basically what happened was I got to a point where I felt, you know what, I have learned about everything I can learn in this situation. I could have kept going there. It was a decent job. It was a nice job. I could have kept going for quite a while. It would have still been comfortable, but I realized that it wasn't where I wanted to be. So what I ended up doing was I took a internship to go to Westside Barbell. For those of you that don't know, Westside Barbell is a powerlifting gym. Also, for those of you that don't know what powerlifting is, because I'm sure some of you coming to this podcast have no clue what the hell that is. You're maybe not the fitness types. Powerlifting is a sport in which you try and get as strong as possible. So you have 3 lifts. You have the squat, the deadlift, and the bench press. And in a competition, you get 3 attempts at each lift to lift the heaviest weight possible that you can with that lift. Then we add the best of each of your attempts together to get a total. And then that total is compared up against other people in your weight class. So, for example, I'm about 185 pounds now, which actually puts me in the 198 weight class. I just suck at cutting down weight. The nearest weight class should be the 181 weight class. But I tend to lift in the 198 weight class because I'm just really lazy about taking off a few pounds here and there. So, basically in the 198 weight class, my total will be compared up against other guys about the same size as me. And then whoever has the highest total wins. And of course, you can also do things like set world records and individual lifts. But that's certainly a ways off for me if it's ever possible. I actually just recently wrote a blog post about how I don't think it's quite possible anymore. But yeah, so that's powerlifting. And I went to Westside Barbell, which is a powerlifting specialized gym. It's a legendary gym. It's owned by Louis Simmons, who's been powerlifting for, I think, 40 years now or something like that. He knows so much stuff when it comes to training powerlifters. So I went there, to learn as much as I could from the expert. It's in Columbus, Ohio, so I lived in Columbus, Ohio for a couple months. And then I came back, and I had, this internship under my belt. So I looked for better jobs in the Detroit area. I'm from Detroit, by the way. But I didn't quite find anything, that was really working out long-term for me. And I ended up actually getting an offer to go to Saudi Arabia to work at the first CrossFit in Saudi Arabia. It's called CrossFit 966, also known as 22 Athletics. And I had a blast, but it unfortunately just wasn't the right environment for me. We can talk more about that in a future podcast, but it's actually quite recent. It's still fresh in my mind, so I don't feel like it's, sort of the right time to open up about it. You have to wait. You have to sort of get the right distance to these things before you can really, talk, not objectively, but you can talk with the right perspective. You can talk with the right distance. So, coming home from Saudi Arabia, I stayed in Saudi Arabia for 3 months, and after that I decided to come back. And I ended up moving to Chicago. So as of now, I'm living in Chicago. working in Chicago as well, but I'm also doing a lot of online type stuff. So aside from that, my main portal on the internet is my www.philosopher-warrior.com. That's my blog. That's my main portal to everything. If you click on that, you can also actually get a free copy of my first ebook, The Uplift Method. That's an ebook about sort of... It talks a lot about my psychological struggles. It talks a lot about my philosophy of training. And it's also designed to sort of help beginners get a perspective on how to start their training. It's not quite the normal... Again, it's not quite what you expect out of a fitness book because I take a very different approach from some people. But, again, you can get a free copy of that by signing up for our emailing list. And, of course, if you sign up for the emailing list, you also get all kinds of other goodies, links to all my blog posts when they come out. So, I highly recommend that. There's a ton of good information in there. I try to keep the value high. I try not to sell to you guys too much within that email. I also have my first fantasy ebook out. It's called Endless Days. It is a vampire novella, kind of about, for me, it's about sort of exploring the question of immortality. It's about learning to enjoy the value of human life, is what I would say it's most about. But it's also, it's pretty cheap. It's $3 on Amazon, and it's only about 50, 60 pages. So it's a quick read. I recommend that you try that out if you want to get a handle on, my fantasy writing, because you'll probably see a good amount of my fitness writing on the blog, but not so much the fantasy stuff. Anyway, aside from that, that is pretty much it. I'm pretty well connected in the fitness industry. I know quite a few people. So in this podcast, the idea is that I will get other people to come on and share their stories, but I'll also talk about topics that interest me. So they may be philosophy topics, they may be fitness topics, they may be criticism topics, they may be political, they may be literary, it doesn't matter. And up front, I am pretty liberal. That's kind of an understatement, actually. I'm very liberal, and I identify as a feminist. I identify as, pro-trans activism, pro-queer, all sorts of other stuff. You'd probably call me a social justice warrior if you're on the, more right-wing end of things. And I don't like that term, but, whatever, it happens. So, just an advance warning, we will cover topics that, may be obviously related to those things. If you want to get worked up into a frothing, foaming rage at my opinions, that's fine. I identify also kind of as a pacifist, so I really don't engage people very much when it comes to stuff like comments and angry tweets and all that. So, don't expect that it's really going to bother me too much. But anyway, this has been the first podcast, week 1, the Prospectus. Next week and each week thereafter, we will be focusing on the usual type stuff. So it's been great to have a chance to talk to everyone, great to have a chance to get my work out there, and I hope to see you guys around next week.